All right. Michael and Sherry, welcome again. This is going to be part two of our ongoing discussion of Emil Bock's book on the Apocalypse of St. John. Last time we basically got through the forward, and I think the plan today is to dive into chapter one. And I'm going to try to be like a little less dictatorial of the direction of the conversation this time. I thought I was a little too heavy-handed, so let's try to let this flow a little bit more freely. And I wanted to open up to either of you to go ahead and share your initial thoughts first.
I'll just say this real quickly. When we first started reading this, I was like, I didn't really know what to make heads or tails of this book, period. Like, I was just like, whoa, like, and so now I've probably read the first 3 chapters in the forward at least, I don't know, a dozen times at least. And so like on each subsequent reading, I'm becoming more and more convinced that there's something really really interesting and timely being discussed in the book.
Timely?
Yeah.
Timely.
That was unintentional.
No, that's. What do you think? So yeah, I've read it several times too. What do you think it is like on those subsequent readings that you've started to? What is it you started to get a sense that the book has to say that's important?
Yeah.
I well, I guess the thing that it's pointing to is the reality of the spiritual. And again, that's a word that kind of fudges within at least the categories I'm still kind of framed in, and that kind of make up the basis of the building blocks of how I think about things. So I'm still like trying to figure out how it fits in, but it just that, yeah, the reality of this is going to be coming into our lives, whether we like it or not. So,
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe it's easier, Michael, to use the term super sensible.
yeah,
like he does. Instead of spiritual.
I like that.
Yeah, that I think that is a really great way of putting it, because it tells you like, yes, I like that a lot, because it also gives you, it ties it to Barfield's idea of the unrepresented. Which I think
it doesn't necessarily set up the dualism that I would think of in my old categories, right? Of like this kind of like spirit realm, like, which is completely disconnected from the reality that I see.
Right.
Yeah, and we like to keep. It seems to me that we like to keep it distinct. Like we don't. It would make us really uncomfortable if those two things were integrated properly, right? But when I think that's the thing about the book that is disturbing, perhaps, is that he's taking the super sensible and he's integrating it into every single day of your life. It's not just an end time, right? It's a now time. And when you do that to people, it's like you really are taking two very distinct, what they think are very distinct things, and smashing them into each other. And
oh yeah, so there's right. Yeah, in fact, he says that like that's what that he says that what it's about ultimately, the apocalypse, Revelation, is about the super sensible realm like coming full force in contact with the material. And talking about that discomfort, like he says that like he says that like the reason that we have all this language about like, wrath and discomfort is for that people who are not ready for it, it's going to be like, it will blow them apart. Like they, their response will be, and he suggests that the initial response will be to basically double down on power and materiality, because that's what they know.
Well, that's their raft,
right?
In this,
right.
That's all they have. Yeah, like I was trying to do this on my computer so I could use my iPad to read some of my highlighted bits out of the book.
Sure.
but I couldn't get my computer to do it properly. So, but I thought it was interesting when he said that the second coming is the coming of a whole sphere. And I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think that means? Like, I know he's talking about the super sensible, but yeah, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's the arrival of heaven to earth. It's the
Yeah.
joining of them. That's what I think he's talking about. I can actually, if you want me to quote the text, I think I know where that is.
It's right in
let's
the
see.
beginning.
Yeah, it's toward the
believe.
beginning of chapter 1. Let's see here. One moment. The second coming of Christ is the coming of a whole sphere. The supersensible world approaches as a whole. The clouds which have hitherto veiled the returning of Christ will be rent asunder. And that part of the human race which has grown earthbound and loveless without realizing that in doing so it has inflicted continual injury on the Godhead, has pierced him, will be inescapably exposed to perceiving the cosmic storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the second piece to that, like that I really liked for obvious reasons, but that they won't be terrified to see him as a judge, but rather to see the super sensible approaching. Right. So it's often misinterpreted as, oh no, they're terrified because Christ is coming to judge them.
They won't actually see that, is what he's saying. He's like, they won't understand what's going on because they won't have it. It'll actually only be those who are already, as Christians, like living in communion with God, that will actually be able to see it at all. So they just will have no comprehension of what's going on. They'll have no frame of reference for it.
Yeah, I found that
I always find it kind of interesting. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead,
I was
Shari.
just going to reflect.
No, you go. Go, Michael.
I was going to reflect on that having having grown earthbound and loveless without realizing it, that in doing so it had inflicted continual injury on the Godhead. I found that little phrase there really interesting, and it made me think of a sort of what again I think that the cross is is not an example of like a one-off event. It's like an always continuing reality of the relationship between God and the creation. That something is in our movements away from him that actually continually, are so piercing him, as it says in the text here. That I found that really interesting, because that is, it just, for me, it's bringing together so many ideas in the book of Revelation that that were so separated previously, and now I'm seeing them kind of not as just a sort of map of some sort of like, what how do I know if the Antichrist is going to pop on the scene tomorrow? It's more of this, again, this sort of always this pattern of unfolding that is with us now that the reality of Christ has been made manifest, but is continual.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys got to see the video I linked from the Cambridge series on Paul and philosophy, but the part two of that, like,
No.
he was actually talking about like the Paul's view of the time and the cosmos, but he also related that to essentially as like the anticipation of the Parousia as a mode of being. Is the way Saint Paul actually sees it. It's like you live as if you are in the pressing time. And that's the
And in some
proper
sense,
Christian
we
mode
all,
of being.
in some sense, we all are, because we're all approaching our own death, right?
Right, exactly.
And
So,
it's like this. It's like a way of actually practicing that liturgically, that you are in this kind of crucible of time right now that is very limited. But we don't, especially in the modern frame, we hate to think about that. Like, we will do anything to not be reminded of that reality. And so like signs of aging are the worst, because it's like, oh, we can't be reminded of this reality that is more sure than anything else we know. Death and taxes, right? But we don't want to be confronted with it. We want to pretend like, somehow modernity is going to solve that problem and give us a pill that allows us to live forever or something, or of that nature.
Yeah, and modernity does want to do that. Like it does want to extend life, right? We talk about all these, and probably overwhelmed simply because people are living longer, and as they do, they live with more chronic disease, right? And so now what they've been doing, and I've heard this time and time again, now what the system here is doing is opting to only treat you in an emergency. So if you actually survive your illness, then they'll extend your life, right? But the oxymoron of the whole thing is that in their attempt to save their lives, they're losing their lives, which is what Christ talks about, right? So in the attempt to medically manage longevity, they're having to just let people die, which is just so perfect, like so perfectly human, right? To be that short-sighted about the whole thing. Anyway, that just came to my mind. Really,
No.
that's really what's the word? Aktuell in German. That's really happening for me right now. Like the thing that happened with my husband, that was he was a managed cardiac patient. They knew that he could die, and they treated him only when he suffered an emergency, right?
Yeah,
So,
I know. I don't know if either of you have ever I know Ivan Illich made the remark that um his primary observation about modern medicine is how it manages to keep people alive in states of like remarkably bad health.
yeah,
Because all it is so focused on just like managing symptoms and managing crisis, and we really don't do a good job of like focusing on health.
Yeah.
no,
So
and I mean this gets very contemporary, with COVID and all that stuff, right? This attempt to save a life, but at the same time, lives are being lost. Like life is actually being lost as a result of, the the attempt to stop people from dying. Like it just rings so true, that whole, if you save your life, you will lose it, right?
yeah, right.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a little off track.
Well, I don't know if it is off track because so like there's a lot of like in this first chapter, like there's a discussion of like, what is meant by like the sense of like the imminence of the Parousia, right? That it's coming soon. There's a discussion of that, and then there's a discussion of Kairos. And I think that what you're talking about actually does actually deal with what our proper relationship to time is.
Yeah, I had that little section highlighted about the compression of time, like the intensity. Could you read that, Nate?
Yeah. Yes.
Not too far from where you were reading before, I think.
Okay, let's see here.
When Christ comes, the time is laden with force.
There you go. I think that's it. Yeah.
Charged with vast destinies. It talks about like, for the time is at hand. And it says, unfortunately, modern languages are rather inadequate to reproduce the Greek of the apocalypse.
There you go.
The concise, condensed language in the original text, the Apocalypse, has been attributed by many theologians to a special relationship with Hebrew, thus supporting their opinion that St. John's Revelation is in fact a Jewish book written in Hebrew, translated into Greek, and elaborated by Christianity. In reality, however, the Apocalypse is saturated with intuition even in its language. The Greek of the Gospels is much more human. In the Apocalypse, we are dealing with a Greek such as archangels would speak if they made use of human speech. If we translate the sentence something with kairos, my thing garbled it, the time is at hand, we are likely to misunderstand it seriously. It would be more correct to say the time is limited, time presses. The sentence is indeed a description of how the inner tempo, the spiritual vigor of the age, will be different when mankind enters the apocalyptic era. When Christ comes, the time is laden with force, charged with vast destinies. In addition, the Greek text does not employ the ordinary use for time, but speaks of the kairos, that this means time which has matured, which is fulfilled. In the same way, the sentence thrice repeated at the end of the book, "Behold, I come quickly," should not be understood as a meaning that only early Christendom expected to be separated only by a short span from this event. The sentence does not promise an early approach. It is rather a characterization of the dynamic quality of time. The meaning is, I come in the pressing, the urgent time, the time which bears within it an immense spiritual hastening, breaking in with power upon a humanity which is forever too slow. There is a challenge in these words. That Christ comes quickly can very well mean that he comes too quickly for an unprepared and sleeping humanity. That the time is near may mean that it is short, that it is actually too short considering the slowness and laziness of human souls.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and in that lecture that I shared, it's like his argument was that like St. Paul's basically saying this is what you can know for certain. So all this like all this speculation about like when is the Antichrist going to come on the stage, and post-millennial, pre-millennial, like all that is none of that is anything that we can know for certain. But St. Paul's point is that what we can know for certain is that we will not be ready. So you need to be living in a mode of being that is always has a sense of the pressing time. That is the Christian mode of living. So
okay, so I watched that video with Lee Mullen that you shared, Nate.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found really interesting was that he says that time, well, for Einstein, the three dimensions are space and the fourth dimension is time, right? And what was my thought on this now? Geez, I didn't write enough notes. Shoot, I just lost it. Okay, well, it was about that dynamic intensity of time entering in, as this fourth dimension. Like we live kind of divorced from time. Like the way he was talking about it, we think that time is, something that you can see happening because A happens, then B, and then C, right? So it's linear. But he said it's actually the causality that's causing that gives us time, right? What I found really fascinating is that without relationship, there is no time. That's basically what he said.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about being as communion, right?
Right.
He said, I quote him here, if you write down a list of all the causal relationships between all the events in the universe, you describe the geometry of space-time almost completely.
Right.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
But it's only through relationship that you have time. And I think he said the Newtonian perspective was that time was linear and that you just had these like historical moments happening on it. But he's saying that it's dynamic, right? And that it's actually a result of all the relationships that you have time instead of it just being a line that you're drawing your moments on top of, right?
Right.
And this gets confirmed by relativity, right? Which makes the case in that video that I shared where he's talking about like, well, you know, the perspective on which events are simultaneous with other events just depends on where you are.
Right.
You know, there's always this sort of relative slice of the time segment that you see from your vantage point, but which in another realm, moving at a different speed, you would see completely differently.
Right. Yeah. Well, what I thought was kind
it
of
also, but that view does make it very difficult to recover any sense of the now or presence, even though we have this psychological sense of that. What do you make of that?
Which view?
That if you take the problem with, okay, so that kind of like, they're in that kind of like relativistic view of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You kind of lose the sense of time as like having a past, present, and future.
Okay, so
but psychologically that's still how we experience time.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? Why is that the case, and what meaning do you take from that?
Well, I think what it says is that we have to be a little bit more less ambitious with our notions of these subjects. That in some sense, that's all we have that's all we can really make predictions about, is really about our own kind of sense of time. Like we need to be more kind of narrowly focused, and we want to have a sort of system that encompasses everything and all the data, and that I think it just, for me at least, it just says, hey, that's not really possible, and it's kind of a fool's errand to try and create it or to use it to create it for some sort of predictive value. The further you get away from yourself, the less accurate it is, right? And so for me, it sheds a lot of doubt on the modern project period, and says, okay, which I think is a good thing, because it opens up a lot of
I do think so. I think there's a very strong argument to suggest that postmodernity doesn't happens historically post relativity in physics. That's not accidental. I mean people always talk about like the impact of like about the wars of the early 20th century, but I think relativity also is a factor here too, because it kind of naturally leads towards thinking about it naturally leads to a loss of foundations and a looking at things perspectively, like by its nature, like once you start thinking in those terms. So what would you think of, so I would say it actually kind of points toward the end of objectivity.
Yeah. Well, I think
because there's almost relativity almost has an implied subjectivity in it, right? Because it's like the experience is based on the point.
Well, that's what I read in that thing somewhere. One of the things you'd linked to before here, right? That there is no absolute time, there is no absolute space. There's only relationships between things that create both of those properties.
Right.
Well, I'm a little bit confused, because what Michael was talking about was the first physicist. I can't remember his name now. What I was talking about before was from that Lee Mullen.
He has a very different kind of view.
Totally different view.
Yes.
So for him, everything is connected, and time is not emergent, but it's fundamental, and time is actually relationship. Relationship is time, right? And then he said something interesting. He said that the best way to understand Einstein's theory of general relativity is that the events themselves create the concept of space. So events are within time, right? Which are for this man, relationship, right? And it's those relationships that actually create space. I mean, that's a very simplified version of but that is what he's saying, you know? And I find that kind of fascinating because, I mean, God, as you know, as the Trinity is relationship. That's what he's modeling, right? He's modeling communion, and it's through that communion that we actually have space and time. It spirals out of it. It spirals out of that communion. And the other thing that came to my mind was also the story of creation. Creation was what, you know, this idea of causality, right? Instituting time, relationship.
Right.
I don't know if I can explain it well enough, but you know, God said the earth was without form and void, and out of that chaos, God called out the potential. And when he did that, everything became causally related to itself, and time emerged, or not emerged, but time became.
Yeah, it's just an interconnectedness, certainly within becoming, at least. But I still want to know, here's what I mean, theologically, what I would want to ask is, what is this, okay, that's fine, but what is God's relationship to time? And then what is God's relationship to the creation?
Yeah.
And I don't know that we can answer either of those.
And what
I
is
think
this,
it's
and what is the status of the now? And then,
Well,
and the reason I bring that up is because, like, in the text that we're reading, like, Bock talks about this idea of in the arrival of the supersensible realm, he says, he uses the language of time becoming space. I'm actually kind of sneaking into the very beginning of chapter 2 here. But it's certainly, he's already talking about time in the discussion of, like, Parousia and time as kairos, so it's not really, it's still kind of connected. And I'm not saying I have any answers, I'm just saying those are the questions that naturally occur.
Right, but what, like, that portion there that Michael read, you know, because we tend to want to make time linear, right? We think of, that's why we think that the apocalypse is coming instead of the apocalypse is now. Okay, like
Apocalypse now.
Well, you know.
No, stay with that though. Stay with that
Yeah.
though. Stay with that.
Well,
though.
okay, so you have this, you know, now I lost my train of thought. Like, what I liked about that portion that Michael read, and I wish I had it in front of me here, but when he talks about the dynamic intensity of time changing, right? So it's not like time is running out. Like, he makes that point, like when he says the end is near or whatever, or something like that. You know, we just can't help but think about, you know, far away and closer, and, you know, we think always in these linear conceptions, right, when it comes to time. But he's trying to talk about time as an energy in a way, right? As something that presses in, that becomes more intense, that becomes more urgent, right?
But
and so if you
doesn't everybody have the, I mean, I don't know if this is universally the case, but it seems like time is going faster. Like every subsequent year, it feels like time's going faster. Everybody I talk to seems to have that case. Would everybody agree on that? Like, that just seems a perceived reality.
No, this is actually a universal. This is almost universally the psychological experience of human beings. It's like, if you think about the way time passed when you were a child, compared to as you age, it's like time passes much more. Like, a summer can last forever when you're a child on summer vacation. And as we grow older and mature, like time starts to accelerate. And I think that like there's definitely like we have this cultural sense that like our our collective experience of time seems to be accelerating too. Like no doubt about it. Well, I don't know about no doubt about it, but it certainly
because part of what you
is.
how your experience of time is always relative to the rate of change, right? And so I do think there's
I think that your experience of time is either drawn out, like time can seem longer or shorter by the way that you mark it. So we have a lot of festivals, feast days, holidays, let's call them holy days, where we mark time, right? And one of the things that has become apparent to my husband and myself, because all our kids are away, we don't mark time as much as a normal family would. We don't, we're not having birthday parties for the kids. We're not having Easter anymore, really, just the two of us, like we celebrate Christmas and New Year's. Those are our holidays. And the rest of the year, it's just kind of all the days blur into each other. But when you, and then it seems like the year goes really quickly. But when you start marking time, and I think that's what you do as a child. I remember once my mother telling me that I could go to a friend's house for 10 minutes before dinner. And I thought 10 minutes was forever.
Right.
Like for me, that age,
right.
10 minutes, like,
right.
Oh, really? 10 minutes? Oh my God, that's going to be fantastic, And it was a long time. But I marked it because I was active, right? I was like constantly active and exploring and discovering.
Right.
And when you stop marking time with those things, then it just seems to blur.
Don't you think culturally we've stopped marking time as much, like compared to say like, right? I mean, because like it used to be that the liturgical calendar of the church like dictated the rhythms of life in the community.
Yes.
And we seem to have like lost most sense of that.
Right.
And what does that what does that mean? What are we to make of it? And like, and also I'm wondering, it's like this is going to be a bizarre thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's occurring to me. It's like, do we have some agency in the way we experience time?
Oh yeah.
Like, is that like and is there a way as Christians that you think that the apocalypse has to speak about how we should
well I think that we
time?
can I think we can employ our agency in how we experience time. But one of the things when I was reading through all this stuff and thinking about it, one of the things that came to my mind was when I was suffering a very terrible depression. I was hospitalized. And when I got to the hospital, I was in really, really bad shape. And I laid down in the bed and I was just laying there listening to, the nurse had put on some kind of, I don't know, meditative music or something like that. And I was laying there and she came in to give me some water or whatever. And I said to her, "What time is it?" And she said, "Oh, it's 5 minutes later, basically it was." And I said to her, "You mean only 5 minutes has passed? It feels like it's been hours."
Yeah.
And she said, "No, it's only 5 minutes, and don't worry, it's not unusual." So I thought about that, and I remember being a little bit terrified by that, by the fact that only 5 minutes had passed, and it felt to me like it was hours, and I wasn't on any medication, but I thought that is what someone who is suffering, how they experience time, right? It just seems to go on forever, when you're suffering, right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is also why suffering is so linked to education and formation, because it's like you can have like a lifetime of data that gets squeezed into a few minutes when you have suffering involved.
That's a good point, Michael. Yeah.
Which brings us back to this idea of pressing again, because that's
Yeah.
part of it too. Like that's part of what the pressing is.
Yeah, and some of my hypothesis in saying that I think time is going faster. I mean, I think you're right that there's kind of like as in the different stages of life, you experience time differently. And I think part of that just has to do with the fact that when you're younger, you have less control of your life. So you
Mhm.
can't control and do the things you want to do. And so you're in pain more frequently, you're being formed more often. And so
Mhm.
that makes time seem a lot longer when you're stuck in, class all day. But I do think part of the hypothesis is this, and this is kind of more linking back to what we're talking about with time pressing is like, okay, if we say that the end of time in some sense is heaven fully come to earth, and heaven is this sort of infinite realm, you would think that you could never get to the end of it. You could never get to some actual full participation between those two things unless there was some acceleration over time, right? So that like it starts out kind of slow, but by the end, it's happening at kind of like an almost infinite speed so that heaven can actually come into earth.
Can't?
Can.
And
Because
Can't.
otherwise it would never happen. Like, okay, we're saying so this idea of theosis in
so
heaven,
you're suggesting that it has like a sort of an exponential acceleration
yeah, would have to.
built into
Well,
the divine plan.
If we just want to say, okay, we have the finite here and then we have this infinite over here, these two things are going to come together, and they have to come through this narrow window of this thing we call time. You would just say that would just take forever unless there was some sort of acceleration to the process as
Okay,
it went along.
Okay, so as I said before, suffering extends time out, right? Makes it seem longer. But also anticipation does, right? So remember as waiting for your baby to come. 9 months was like, oh my God, this takes forever, Or Christmas, when you were a kid. Can't wait for Christmas, right? Or the cliche, a watched pot never boils.
Yeah.
Right? So you have anticipation that draws time out, and you have suffering that draws time out. I think that those things are very Christian, those two things, right? We are called to suffer and we are called to anticipate. And that seems to extend time out. I don't know. It was just a thought I had. I don't know if that resonates with either one of you, but I thought of it while Michael.
But here's the thing. So, but I would say that the thing that makes that, so yes, but then I would say that the thing that makes that like that sort of extension of time of anticipation of the suffering, what makes that tolerable is that you could circumvent that in as much as you are attempting to live into the kingdom now.
Okay, so
which is completely opposite movement, which is to live time as if it were live in time as if it were eternity.
Okay, but listen though, I just thought of this while you were talking.
Okay.
The next happens in those two modes of being. When you are suffering, you are living in the present. You are not thinking about the past, and you are not thinking about the future, right? You are living immediately in the now, and also when you're anticipating something, you are also right in the moment. Like I'll often literally be watching a pot waiting for it to boil, right, when I'm making dinner. And then I think, oh, just go distract yourself with something else, right? Go think about something else. Don't be right in the moment, because it takes forever when you're in the moment. Isn't that interesting?
Right. Yeah. So
is that how we enter into the now? Is or is that why we should be in the now? I don't know. I'm just having a lot of questions, not really having any coherent thoughts.
Well, it seems like it's an impossible task, right? I mean, it's like I would say that like it's forever elusive to us, which is why I think that this is why the now and presence has always been associated with the divine. And I really don't want to throw out either I don't want to throw out either kind of view of time, because I think that one view of time is appropriate to becoming. I mean, it is our intuitive. It may not be how time actually is, but the fact that it is the way we perceive time still has meaning, and it is somehow appropriate to becoming. But I think, like, to me, like, there's a definite connection between like eternity and the now.
Okay, so elaborate on that, Nate. I want to hear what you're thinking.
Well, I think that's why the now is elusive. Like, I think that, like, that's like, so when I think that's what Bock is talking about when he talks about time becoming space. Like, that's like, it's space. We have, like, we experience space as like this kind of, like, our experience of space is as this like infinite openness, right? This is, I mean, if we were trying to describe space, it's like we cannot conceive of a boundary to it, right? That's like,
Right.
that's just psychologically, that's how we think of it. Well, if time becomes space, then time takes on that same characteristic of boundaryless openness, which
Okay,
is the eternal now.
okay, but
Because there's no,
that
it's no longer a sequence of, it's no longer a sequence of events. It's no longer becoming. It now is.
right.
In it, which is the divine mode. Like, only God really properly is. We have being within the realm of becoming. We have being, but we are not in that absolute sense that God is.
Right, but like according to that physicist, that's why I thought it was so interesting when he said that the events themselves create the concept of space. So the events are time, right? That's time, but time is actually communion, and communion creates space. According to the theory of relativity, that was his explanation.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I watched that, but I couldn't really follow his argument.
Okay.
Yeah, I was having a very difficult time with that. I would have to like watch it again, and I'm not like, I in terms of like about relation and being fundamental to being and being as communion, I entirely agree with you. I Although I don't, my reasons for thinking that like have nothing to do with physics, and I
No,
don't
well,
really, and I and I don't really like. I actually did not like. It's Smolin is his name, right? I didn't actually I didn't actually follow his argument. I would
okay.
probably have to see it in like a longer form to like get it.
Well, I jumped all over it because
Yeah.
I put theological language on it, right? Like when he said, if you write down a list of all the causal relationships between all the events in the universe, you describe the geometry of space-time. And then he said, the events themselves create the concept of space, which to me is very theological in its essence, because of if you understand being as communion, right?
Right.
That
I think
yeah,
that let me see if this is right. Let me try to understand like the link you're making. I think
okay.
that you are reading event. I think that you are reading event as like a conscious happening.
Reading what event?
An event, yeah. Like, how would you
Event.
like what is an event? See, this is the part that this is where I break down. Like, this is where what he's trying to say breaks down for me is like, I don't know what he means by an event.
Well, he said,
I can follow it if by event he means a conscious awareness that has come
yeah,
into being, then I can understand what you're saying. But I don't know what he means by event.
no, I don't. I'm not entirely. Well, he does.
An event is a happening, right? Something has
Okay,
happened.
maybe this helps, and
Okay.
I'm pursuing this because I want you to help me understand it too.
Okay.
So, he says there's two thoughts. Time is either fundamental or it's emergent, right? Or a consequence.
Right.
He thinks it's fundamental, that it's separate from space. That's why he says it creates space itself. And he said the relationship of causality would dissolve if time is emergent. I wrote that down because I don't really see how that would work. But when he says relationship of causality, I kind of just see the word communion in my mind, right?
I want to see that. I want to see what you see. I really do. Because so like
I think he's definitely has a desiccated version of that in his causality. I think what he's saying is like, hey, look, modern science is dead if we don't do this one trick here to make sure that we have some, because otherwise, like what he's saying is that in some sense, if we don't have this structure of time, how can we say X caused Y? If time is just emergent, if it isn't real, then we can't really, the relationship between X causing Y dissolves. And I think as a modern scientist, that makes his point to being go away. And so he for him, that's of utmost importance. It's at the top of his hierarchies that be preserved.
Okay, but that's a purely materialistic way of thinking.
Yeah,
right. But I think that's the frame that from that guy is working in.
Right. That is. But this is why I want to understand the analogous link that you're making, Shari.
Yeah, I'm trying to
because I actually like, which is why I was trying to. I think the key is like I think the key is like, so well, what do you mean by causality, as compared to what he might mean, and what do you mean by events, and how can the link be made between causality, event? I think the terms you're working with, causality, event, relation, communion.
Yeah, they're all.
How does that picture lead to a picture of communion?
The best.
Which is why I want. This is why I want to link. I think that you can make the argument that you're. I think you can. Okay, I think that you can articulate the argument that you're intuiting, if event is somehow tied to conscious awareness. Like how can there be an event? Okay, how can there be an unperceived event?
Right. Okay. So
what does that even mean?
What I'm intuiting is the creation story in all of this. Okay.
Right.
That is the analogy for all those things, right? God spoke, let there be, and there was, right? Then you have an event, right? You have a cause and you have an event. So then you end up.
So so are you kind of like pointing toward like a Barthian understanding of God as an event?
I don't know. I don't know what Barthians.
I'm actually okay. Well, I think there is kind of like, I think there's a way that like seriously, if you think about like, well, what is an event or happening? Like
it's like,
how does that even, if there isn't some consciousness,
right,
to bear witness to an event, sure. What is the meaning of it?
But you can't have a relationship either without it, right? Like I think that these things
exactly relationship. Yes, that's exactly. I'm actually trying to make your argument for you.
Thank you.
So yes, if I would say that both relationship and event are concepts that require a conscious observer to even make sense of what you're talking about.
Right, and that's implied for me. I guess that's
right. Exactly. You would just intuit that to be necessary, and I'm just like, for people who don't make that immediate intuitive jump, I'm just trying to like build the steps. And it's like, if you accept that relationship and relation and event are concepts that have to have a conscious awareness to even make sense of what you mean by them, then you have to have some sort of conscious awareness as their source.
Right. And then so with that, if you take the story of creation, you have this cause, you have an event, you have a relationship, and then that creates space according like that's why his quote jumped out to me. The events themselves create the concept of space, right? And it reminded me also of when I was talking about idolatry, when the Northman picks up the stick and he carves Odin into it, right? And he's discovered an aspect of God, right? A characteristic of God, right. and he made it real in a stick, and then he can either continue to see the stick iconically as God, right? Look through it, or he can stop short at it. And when he does that, he creates a space between him and the idol, right? And it's you know, I was talking about something completely different, but that was the space where, you know, the demonics, let's say, can enter in, right, and twist things. But we do that too, right? Like when we have relationship to something, we create a space. We actually do that. That's why it jumped out to me, because you have a space between you and your wife.
Right.
And you have a different one between you and your child. You have a space between you and God, right? And we do create these spaces. So I just found it really, the way he was explaining it from a physicist point of view, it mapped perfectly onto my theological worldview, I guess, of the way that these things lay themselves out.
Okay.
If that's helpful.
It's okay. We're talking about I still don't know if I fully understand, but I like where you're going with this, and it's something I would like. I definitely would try to like spend some time mapping out even more.
Yeah.
Like I would say it has to do with, okay, so here's where I think, okay, let's say I feel like we're leaving Michael out of this discussion. Michael, I want to invite you back into at this point, because do you have anything to add here?
Yeah. Any thoughts, Michael?
Well, when you were linking everything back to consciousness, that makes me think of now, right? Because that's the quintessential nature of consciousness, is an experience happening now, and your awareness of that. And that made me think of what you were doing, linking now to eternity, right? Which maybe I looked up this quote by C.S. Lewis where he does the same thing. If you guys think that would be interesting, where he links now he makes the connection between now and eternity.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, let's hear it. That may be where I got it, because I've read a lot of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. So this is from Screwtape Letters.
I've read that book too. So
the demons talking about how they're gonna, distract the humans. The humans live in time, but our enemy, that's God, destines them to eternity. He therefore, I believe, wants them to attend chiefly to two things: to eternity itself, and to that point of time which they call the present. For the present is the point at which time touches eternity. Of the present moment, and of it only, humans have an experience analogous to the experience which our enemy has of reality as a whole. In it alone, freedom and actuality are offered them. He would therefore have them continually concerned either with eternity, which means concerned with him, or with the present, either meditating on their eternal union with or separation from himself, or else obeying the present voice of conscience, bearing the present cross, receiving the present grace, giving thanks for the present pleasure. Our business is to get them away from the eternal and from the present. With this in view, we sometimes tempt a human, say a widow or a scholar, to live in the past. But this is of limited value, for they have some real knowledge of the past, and it has a determinate nature, and to that extent resembles eternity. It is far better to make them live in the future. Biological necessity makes all their passions point in that direction already, so that thought about the future inflames hope and fear. Also, it is unknown to them, so that in making them think about it, we make them think of unrealities. In a word, the future is, of all things, the thing least like eternity. It is the most completely temporal part of time. For the past is frozen and no longer flows, and the present is all lit up with eternal rays. Hence, the encouragement we have given to all those schemes of thought, such as creative evolution, scientific humanism, or communism, which fix men's affections on the future, on the very core of temporality. Hence, nearly all vices are rooted in the future. Gratitude looks to the past and love to the present. Fear, avarice, lust, and ambition look ahead.
That's great. That's perfect. And I want to tie this right back to our discussion of this book and the text of the Apocalypse or Revelation in general. Now, take what was just said and then think about this typical evangelical reading of Apocalypse and compare it to what St. Paul has to say about what our attitude should be toward the Parousia. And you'll see that St. Paul is pointing toward that kind of like considering it always to be the pressing moment. Like now is the pressing moment, right? Like you live as if it were every passing moment were the pressing time. Versus like trying to figure out like what future events are going to be indicated by the text. Which so I think it's been in evangelical circles that the book has been read in like completely the opposite spirit of how it ought to be read.
Okay, so to make this about relationship again.
Yeah, that's always a good thing, Shari.
You can't be in a relationship with someone if you're constantly projecting yourself into the future with them or thinking about your past. You would not be able to be in relationship with them at all. You would not even see them.
That is so right.
Yeah.
That is so right. Yeah, that's exactly that because that's what you owe. I mean, that's what relationship is based on, the ability to be present with someone.
Right.
Like,
and when you
like
when you look into the face of your lover, into their eyes, you are living in a moment. Like it's one of the most intense, right?
And this is what God wants from us.
Right. But it's only then and it has everything to do with being known, right? Because that's what it is.
And being known like not as an object, right? But as a subject.
Right. And when you're in relationship, that's what you strive for, is to know, right? Know one another. So when you live in the moment, just as an individual outside of a relationship, well, you're never outside of a relationship because of God, but if you live in the moment as an individual, then you are in relationship to God at that moment. Right. Always. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent, Shari. So again, I just want to ask this question again to see if we can circle back around and figure out like what does that suggest about like the concept of event.
What does that suggest about the concept of event?
Yeah. Is event then perhaps is what the okay is the
okay,
way
well, there is
what
one
is okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's one event. I don't know. I have no answer, but there's one event in Christianity that is pivotal, right? That everything turns on, and that's the Passion.
Right.
So how would you tie that in then? Like, you know, like he says here, and I'm just going to throw my theological interpretation of this physicist's thing down on top of it. If you write down a list of all the causal relationships between all the events, you describe the geometry of space-time completely. Isn't that what the Passion is about? The Passion to me is
it's the ultimate event.
Well, it's the ultimate, it's the ultimate change in space-time itself.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Right?
yes.
And it's an event. It's an event. So I don't know if that's helpful. I'm just throwing
Well, I would say, and not necessarily just like I think I don't think you want to say just the passion. I think that you need to I think like the Advent, the passion, and the resurrection need to all somehow be tied together.
Well, that is my concept of the passion.
Right.
So
I just wanted to give you a chance to say that.
My concept of the passion is the nativity to the resurrection and the ascension. Like that is one operation, that is one event to me.
That defines the shape of reality.
Yeah, that basically, you know, when the veil was torn, I think that the veil being torn really is like what Emil Bock talks about in that chapter when he talks about the clouds being torn.
Oh, he specifically makes reference to that. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the second coming as a whole sphere. That's what happened when Christ, you know, at the Passion, right? That's what Christ's life did for us, right? It changed, like I always like to say, it ripped a hole in our reality, right? But really what it did was it changed space-time.
Right. Okay. So now that you've said that, and Michael, I want to invite you to answer this question too. I'm going to ask a question that I do not have the answer to, but I think it's a fundamentally interesting question. Given like all this like talk that we've had about time, like what is the relationship of the Parousia to time?
I don't know.
That is a fair answer.
I'm fairly agnostic about, because I guess because I've just seen so many attempts to pin it down that I think are maybe ill conceived, and I mean, like I'm finding that this book's conception of it as a always present reality, just like you can look at the evolution of consciousness over the history of mankind itself, but you can also look at it within the span of a single human life or within a certain culture that rises and falls. Like I think these certain patterns get played out over and over again, at different layers. And so when you say Parousia, like I think, I don't know, on the ultimate grand stage of everything, I don't know. But I do think it has something to do with this participation between the finite and the infinite. And, you know, when Jesus says, I go away to prepare a place for you, well, I think there's some aspect of time there, like, right? There's like just as Jesus comes in the fullness of time, there's a fullness of time that has to be reached for that place to be prepared, which is heaven come to earth, right? And so, yeah, I don't know.
Right, but what is the fullness of time though? Is like the fullness of time like? I mean, it's like the full. I mean, it really. This is a really key question because it's like, if time is dynamic, then that can mean like once the sequence of events has played out from beginning to end. But if time is not dynamic, then it has to mean something else.
Time is dynamic, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly that's our intuited psychological experience,
right?
But that may not be how, you know, a given physicist might conceive of time. You know, and I'm not even sure, like Smolin is like recovering some sense of time as being like real,
dynamic.
You think it's dynamic though?
Well, it sounds like it to me.
Because it doesn't seem to. Okay. It's dynamic, but not sequential, perhaps.
Yeah, I think your perspective of time. I'm pretty sure that God has a different perspective on time than we do, and that even follows just from a basic rendering of our physics, right?
Well, that's why I think we can't. Right. Exactly. I think I said this before we started recording. It's like, to me, it's like, I think we're trying to resolve something that I think is irresolvable.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, we can't get we are not going to understand. We're not going to fully understand time from natural science alone, because I do think that the reason we psychologically experience time one way, and our mathematics suggests some other possible models, is that there is a genuine distinction between being and becoming.
Yeah.
And because we are limited to the perspective of being, that we can only possibly ever have anything to say about time from that perspective.
Yeah. And specifically in science.
And probably can't ever have a final word on it.
I was just gonna say anything I don't throw away anything I hear from a scientific perspective, right? Because I think there's real things that can be discovered that are useful, like kind of let's say places to put our foot and stand upon. But I always say, like, the more certain a thing is within a scientific frame, the smaller that frame is within that certainty, right? Like, so like the applicable frame for that certainty is smaller, right? So when we get out to something as large as like the history of time and the universe itself, I think that certainty goes away. Like, it just has to, because I mean, I just see the nature of the tools that we're using and the sort of assumptions that have to be built into the way those tools are used, and the mathematics. And if all you have to do is and realize that all you need is a tiny little bit of uncertainty in that mix, and you expand it out to the history of the universe, and like all your certainty goes away. I mean, we still act like we know that X happened, when T to the minus, I don't know, however many nanoseconds from the Big Bang, which I think is, I mean, I'm glad people do spend time with it, but to me, like, the more certain you are of something, the more likely the thing you're certain of is that it's trivial.
Right.
And I don't know. So like when I'm listening to these guys say stuff, I think, okay, there's interesting patterns in there that can be repurposed and possibly applied in larger frames. But I don't know. I don't find that mode of argumentation just convincing at all, because I like it just relies on so many presumptions that we hold so many things constant, which, the more and more I'm engaging with your idea of relational ontology, the more I see that nothing is held constant.
Right, which is why which is like that sort of relativistic concept of time doesn't bother me too, because I think, like, Steiner is right to say, Steiner is like, yes, relativity is great because it relatively shows you just exactly how there are no finite foundations, and you can't recover the now, which forces you to be pointed towards spirit.
Yeah. Well, as soon as you give a real ontological status to consciousness, the recursive factor of the causal impact of consciousness it just blows everything out of the water. Nobody can do the math. And we clearly can't.
Right. Yep.
And yet it's not. And yet, if there wasn't some basic level of predictability, none of us could survive. So there's something interesting going on there, where we have just the right amount of ability to predict, so that we don't just immediately die, but at the same token, we're consistently and always surprised, which is in some sense what you would want.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Yes. That's it. That is, yeah.
I think a lot of times people get to a place of nihilism and depression because they are absolutely convinced of all their ideas, and there's zero possibility, and their mode of being is there's zero possibility of being surprised. And they've actually convinced themselves to that, so that when they look at the world, that's all they see is what they expect to see, and they've lost that ability to have anything surprising pop into frame.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that
If you
too much certainty
if
too much certainty can lead to nihilism. Is that what you just suggested?
Yes, because yeah, I mean, anytime you get certainty, it's always within this box that you draw, and as soon as you draw that box is always smaller than you, and it's not something anybody can live inside. And if you actually convince yourself that box is the real world you live in, that's ultimate. It's just depressing to the nth degree. Like, I mean,
well, that's that space that you create. That's idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
That's Barfield's whole argumentation right there, is that when something becomes idolatrous, it's that's what certainty is to me anyway. Well, because you stop at it, right? You don't look past it, and
you've reduced everything to an object,
and then you create.
Yeah, you've reduced everything to an object, including your own self. So what is like, that's right. What nihilism is when you've so successfully reduced everything to an object with your objectivity, that even your own personhood becomes just an object. That's the most profound sense of nihilism that you can have, because then what are you?
Right, and that
you're nothing. You're nothing is the answer. I mean, that's it's the only thing you can be is nothing. So
right.
No.
But don't you agree that nihilism itself is a space that you're in? We call it being in something.
Yeah.
Well, I would.
Well, I think what it is, it's a self-created space. I mean, because.
Right.
You know,
that's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was talking about before, when I was saying, you know, that when you have a relationship to something, you create a space between you, yourself, and it, right? If you look at that thing iconically, the space is vast. But if you stop short at it, which is certainty, then you've created an idol, and the space is small. It's a box.
Right.
I feel like I'm not being very well understood.
No, I did actually.
It's just a novel term of that word space, but I think it's applicable for the topic at hand. I think it's just not the usual way that term's used. I mean, I would just say relationship, but it's
right.
But I think because of our modern categories, we actually do. We put it into a spatial category, where it's more.
I'm trying to. I think that this is the way things are seen in the supersensible world. I think this is how the supersensible world sees it, right? As a space. As you know, let's say you're nihilistic, would you say you are in nihilism in that space? You can't just be nihilistic in a giant wide open space that's offering you all kinds of interesting stimuli and things to discover. You have to be within a created space,
a confined space that you created for yourself. Right. And I would say that, and I would say specifically that what it is it's a turning in as opposed to an opening out. Which I think is
certainty is the key ingredient.
Yes,
because you're so certain on the models you have that you don't look at the model long enough to see its deficiencies. All you have to do, like me, I could think, okay, I know this person so well that I don't even have to look at them. This is kind of what you're talking about before, where you don't see the person you're in a relationship with, because you project what you think of them into how you see what they did in the past and how you predict they're going to act in the future. And there's no place for them at all. You just have this model of them and you're not actually seeing them. But if you just have a little bit of doubt about your model and you actually pay attention, you'll see all kinds of anomalies that burst that model apart.
And you'll be more free too.
Yeah.
Way
more possibilities.
Yeah. So yeah. That's really good. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I'm gonna break my brain if we continue along this particular topic. So I think that's a great place to wrap it up. So next time we'll tackle chapter 2 of this very interesting book, which we're taking one chapter at a time. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to the next chapter.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.